This evening's presenter is Derek Smith, and I have to tell you, I'll read his bio. And I've known Derek for a long time, and he's a very, shall we say, humble person. He doesn't. Oh well, he doesn't brag about his accomplishments. I've seen his exhibits. I've seen his awards. He's just very humble. Anyway, Derek is from St. John, New Brunswick, born in 1937. He was educated in business administration, earning a BBA from University of New Brunswick in 1958 and an MBA at the University of California, Berkeley. His entire business was with the Investors Group as an investment analyst and portfolio manager in Winnipeg and Dublin, Ireland. That accounts for his funny accent. On his retirement in 2000, he settled in London, Ontario. A great friend, the late Don Fraser, got him interested in philately and especially in postal history. Derek's maritime roots led to collections centered on St. John, postal markings, and corner cards of the Queen Victoria area, which continue to this day with a new edition studying the hammers made by J.H. Venning for the local post office in the 1860s and 1870s. Primarily, the seaport was responsible for a topical interest in the CPS Empress of Ireland and its tragic sinking. He had a great exhibit on that. His greatest single collection and study was of transatlantic mail between the UK and the three maritime BNA colonies in the pre-stamp period. Exhibits of this material were shown at Benepex, RPSC, and internationally at London 2010. And here's his only bragging. He received a large vermeil in London. Always interested in stamps of pre-Confederation New Brunswick, he has in recent years become especially keen on the 1860 cents issue. Included in his efforts has been seeing what great items exist in the field and recording them. It has led to this presentation. He has received momentous help from many auctioneers who have allowed him to scan and sent him scans from their catalog specifically for this purpose. He really enjoys exhibiting at all levels. In recent years, only at the local, regional, and national levels. This participation adds to the enjoyment of attending stamp shows and conventions. He titles himself an exhibitionist. We won't go into that, Derek. He also actively gives talks on various philatelic subjects at the local and regional levels. He is a member of BNAPS, for whom he wrote the study group Centerline and BNA topics for 5 years and served on the investment committee. He is also a member of the RPSC and the PHSC. Whenever he has exhibited, he has become a member of the local clubs, London Philatelic Society, Oxford's Philatelic Society, Nova Scotia Stamp Club, and since the 80s, his first stamp club was Winnipeg. So this evening, I give you Derek with his presentation on the New Brunswick post offices. Was it pre-1860, Derek?
No, 1860 to 68.
Okay, sorry, 1860 to 1868. I forgot to write that on my notes.
Almost all the talks that are given to you are based on personal collections, but this is an exception for two reasons. One, the materials are going to be shown have never been in one collection, and they're never likely to be. In fact, I can't ever recall having seen an exhibit of the cent issue over the 40 years that I've been attending various stamp shows. So I'll do it in two sections. First, or former, pardon me, we'll outline the stamps themselves, the designs, values, basic production data. I'm not going to get into plating or proofs or errors, with one exception for the benefit of the judges so that they can't shut me off for exceeding my limits. But the bulk of my talk will center on the usage of these 6 stamps at the top. For many of the rates and destinations, there are very few examples. And I've examined auction catalogs and texts over the past 60 years or so to find them. And for you, I've chosen the best of the best, and in a couple of cases, all the known examples. I want to acknowledge these people who have been wonderfully helpful by allowing me to use their scans. Eastern Auctions, Spink USA, City Stamp Montreal, Matthew Bennett, the Saskatoon Stamp Center, Sparks Auctions, and Robert A. Siegel in New York. And a special thanks to the Royal Philatelic Society of London Publications Committee for allowing me to use scans and a lot of material, of course, from Nicholas Argenti's The Postage Stamps of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Okay, in 1859, New Brunswick began the process of changing its currency from pound, shillings, pence to the decimal system. And it was completed over somewhere around a year to finish in 1860. And among the necessities was the creation of a new stamp to be denominated in cents. Now, these 6 values were introduced, 5 between May and August of 1860, and with the addition of the 2 cents in 1863. They continued as the only stamps used in New Brunswick until their replacement by Canada's large Queen's issue on April the 1st, 1868. So as I say, a look at the stamps for starters. The Postmaster General Charles Connell was ordered to undertake the process of acquiring new stamps denominated in cents. And he arranged with ABNC with a contract led in December to have the stamps delivered in time for their planned introduction of May 1st, 1860. He ordered 4 values, the 1 cent for circulars, 5 cents for letter mail to BNA. By the way, BNA did not include Newfoundland. And 10 cents for letters to the USA, excluding California and the Oregon Territory, and 12.5 cents for mail via a Canadian port to the UK. Delivery was made in April. Now, of the 4 stamps, 3 of them were entirely new vignette concepts for stamps within the British Empire. Now, the 10-cent stamp did, as usual, show a photo or a picture of Queen Victoria. And the other 3 were entirely new. No locomotive had been shown before, no steamship, and certainly no Postmaster General. You can bet that Connell's showing himself on the stamp that was going to be most frequently used created an absolute furor within the whole province, and it had to be withdrawn. And Connell was withdrawn too. He was fired as PMG and replaced by James Stedman. As a result, the entire cent stamp issue was delayed from its scheduled May 1st introduction until the 15th. And just as vital, they had to replace the Connell stamp. So Stedman went to ABNC and said, I need a 5-cent stamp, 500,000 of them, and I need them in a hurry. So ABNC merely took the 10 cents value, which had been accepted, changed the numerals and the value tablets, and changed the color to green. And delivery was made of this stamp late June or early July and distributed to the post offices. Now the ERD for this stamp was July 18th, 1860, and that's been the earliest reported for the last 75 years. So it's probably going to stand for a while. I hope, as you'll see later. Well, let's talk about the Connell stamp. It was never used, and yet it's become one of the most, it's become a postal history specialty in Canada or in BNA. Connell was removed from his position as PMG, but he was also ordered to pay the post office back for the cost of the 500,000 stamps and personally to destroy them. Well, the cost amounted to £56, 5 shillings in currency, of which 25 was for the plate and the other 31 odd for the printing. The stamps he shipped personally to his son-in-law, Fred DeBlee, in Woodstock. And the stamps were burned in a bonfire in Connell's own backyard. The story is that he fed each sheet in personally. Well, 5,000 sheets is a lot of personal feeding, I suppose. How many stamps out of the 500,000 were saved? And there's all kinds of stories. But the first story is from DeBlee himself. He took one corner stamp from a sheet and he put it in his watch fob. And we know that's true because the fob itself was found in the mid-1900s and there was the stamp. The rumor is that he gave a sheet to two of his daughters, Ella and Alice, and the daughters eventually destroyed them to preserve the family reputation. Well, it's sort of unlikely. That'd be pretty lot of favoritism there because the Connells had 3 sons and 3 daughters. So let's count that out. The other 100 or 200 copies that are thought to have existed, Connell gave them out at a party. And it must have been a good party because of the 25 or 40 examples known to this day. These are about the only 5, maybe there are a few more copies in good shape, and the rest seem to have been badly scissored, torn, chunks taken out of them, and so it must have been a good party. And there's only one multiple left, and that's the pair on the right. Connell himself was not politically finished by all this. He eventually was elected to the post-Confederation Parliament, and it's a seat he held until his death in 1873. There are rumors that there are 3 stamps that were used, but they've all been decided as being fake, cancels. Well, after these original 4 stamps were arranged and ordered, 2 more values were added. One was the 17 cents for letters to the UK via US ports. And the vignette for the 17 cents shows the young Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII. And this is probably another first for an empire stamp. The portrait was done in 1859 when he turned 18. And the stamps themselves were ordered in April 1860. They probably reached the post offices in July, and there's no record of when they actually went on sale. Now, the last stamp in the issue is the 2 cents, and it was issued in 1863 when they introduced drop letter rates. And the reason for the drop letter rate was that so many people were using the 1 cent circular rate to send their letters locally. So the province decided they were losing too much money on that. So we just introduced the drop letter rate. And the stamp was received in 1863. And like the 17 cents, nobody has any idea when they actually were first used. Just a quick summary of the production data. There were 2 printings of the 1 cent, totaling 600,000 stamps in 1860 in a brown violet shade and 1864 in red lilac. The engine itself is conjectured to be either the Ossakeg, which was the European and North American Railways engine that ran from St. John to Shediac eventually, or more likely it's an American type used in the Northeast. The primary rate was for circulars to BNA, the USA, the UK, and the rest of the empire. There were 3 printings of the 5 cents, 1860, 1862, and 1864, in 3 very different shades. The picture is Queen Victoria taken from the Chalon portrait. It was a full-length portrait, so they took the head and shoulders. And in the portrait, I think she's looking left, whereas in the stamps, she's looking to her right. And I have no idea why, but all the pictures of this type, the Chalon, from the Chalon portrait, do the same. She might have had something to say about it herself, I suppose. And it was for BNA letters up to a ½ ounce. The 10 cents had 2 printings totaling 600,000 stamps. And again, the Queen Victoria head. And it was for letters to the USA, excluding California and Oregon Territory, until 1865. The other 3 values had only 1 printing. In 1860, the steamship, 12.5 cents for mail to the UK via Canadian ports. And again, it's wondered whether the steamship was the Royal William or whether it was a US vessel, the SS Washington. 1 printing of the 17 cents for 100,000 copies. And the timing may have been to recognize the Prince of Wales' upcoming visit to Newfoundland and BNA, August, September 1860. And it was for letters to the UK via a US port. And finally, the 2 cents. The reason for it was the dropped letter, but you could also use it as existing rates for soldiers' letters and special cross-border letters, but none have ever been seen with a 2-cent stamp. There were 3 shades. They're very distinct, and actually it's a nice looking stamp. There was only 1 plate error that I'm going to mention. There's all kinds of scratches and globs of ink and so on and so forth. But this one was consistent through the 3 issues of the 5 cents, and it was also on the plate proof. In position 59, you see in the upper section, there's a blob sticking from her left ear. And the next stamp is the position 60, and you see the elongated earring or slash from the left earring, which of course is catalog. The imprints, the American banknote Co. New-York was the imprint which appeared 8 times on the second printing of the 1 cent. Now, some people suggest, is there 2 plates? But it's never been really pursued. And nobody has ever said that there was a second plate laid. So just the 1 10 by 10, which was used as the format for all these stamps. There were 14 imprints on the 2 cents and just 1 on the 17 cents. So that sort of finishes the information I would like to give you about the stamps. And now we get to the important part of it, as far as I'm concerned, which is the postal usages. And hopefully you'll allow me to have a sip of water and it'll get cut out of the final copy. Okay. Well, the 5 cent rate was for letters within BNA, for letters up to a ½ ounce. And as I said, it did not include Newfoundland. Now, the first problem we have with this is there wasn't a 5 cent stamp, of course, from May the 15th until mid-July. So you had options. The first one was to use the old pence stamps. And the Arfken-Furby study found 2 3-pence used in May and 2 6-pence bisected used in May. And I was just reading it again today. there was a bisected 3 pence, or two parts of a 3 pence bisected, used in June. Or you could use 5 times 1 cent, but none have been seen with in-period cancellations. So the most usual solution was just to bisect a 10-cent stamp. And that was a common practice from the pence era, when the various rates just could not be made with existing whole stamps. And it was equally true in Nova Scotia, and if I come to think of it properly, PEI, and now and then in Canada itself. The early 5-cent bisect was May 30, 1860, sent from Bactouche to Rishabukto, and the one at the bottom is in my collection, and it's better not find too much of an earlier recorded date, because this is quite late, being only 5 days before the 5-cent stamp was put on sale, from Douglastown to Moncton. And if you look closely at the bottom, Moncton is still a bend of Petitcodiac as far as the post office cancellations were concerned. Well, within BNA, here are examples paid with the 5-cent stamp. Now, the earliest recorded use and cover is this on the left. It was sent from St. John to Annapolis, and it's come up for sale a couple of times since, but the problem is nobody wants to catalog it because it's so plain. So I had to go to Argenti and get permission to use this picture from his book. The problem with all these stamps of early New Brunswick is that all the markings are on the back. All the date stamps are on the back, and the rootings thus are hidden on the back too. And on the right are just a couple of examples sent within New Brunswick and another to PEI. I don't have any sent to lower or upper Canada, so I can't show them. And nobody's going to put a 5-cent stamp into a catalog anymore. It was common to use 5 1-cent stamps, and later a pair of 2-cent stamps and a 1-cent stamp to pay the 5-cent rate. I keep thinking that I've seen one with a 2-cent and 3 1-cents, but nobody's ever mentioned it, so maybe it's my imagination. A few examples of extra weights. Usually the double weight was paid with a 10-cent stamp. And actually to find them this way with 2 5-cent stamps is quite unusual. And a couple of examples of other overweights. Here is a short paid cover. It was sent from St. John to Harvey, sent double weight with 2 5-cent stamps. And it was caught by the post office as being a triple weight cover. So it was struck with a hand stamp, more to pay, and the amount, 5 cents, and sent on its way. At this time, there were no fines that required additional postage. In 1866, the system was changed. Before, you could send a letter with no stamps, just collect, and you could pay a fine of 2 cents to have it delivered. But as of late 1866, you had to attach at least part payment with a stamp. If you didn't, it would be sent to the DLO, or if you had happened to have a return address, it would be sent back to you, postage to be attached. And this is an example of the latter. This letter is from Janie Burpee, which is readable on the flap. I should have opened it, I suppose, so you could see it. And so it was sent back to him with an insufficiently prepaid hand stamp. And Burpee attached the 5-cent stamp and put it back into the mail to Summerside, PEI on November 29th. Okay, we come to 1 cent rate. This was for circulars, anywhere in BNA to the USA, to the UK, and anywhere else within the empire. On the left are almost all of them come from St. John. That was the business center of the province. And frankly, it was at least as active as Halifax in terms of business. On the left are copies to Miramichi in New Brunswick, to PEI, and on the right to foreign destinations, the UK and Demerara, British Guiana. The top left and lower right were both from Graham McLeave's collection. 2 cent letter rates. The soldier's concessionary rate had existed for ages and just carried over as 2 cents from 1 penny in the previous, from the pence to the decimal era. 1862, Woodstock to Ayrshire, Scotland. 1863, St. John to Halifax, NS. And I think it's really unusual to see letters within BNA as soldiers' letters. These are possibly the only 2 covers with the soldier's rate. As I mentioned elsewhere, none are known with the 2 cent stamp. Now, I did mention that the 2 cents was for letters to special arrangements for letters between adjacent towns in Maine and New Brunswick. And this is an example. It's the way catalogs used to be done. You only showed a piece in most cases to get more coverage on a page, I suppose. But anyway, this is the only example I've ever seen. It's August 13, 1862, from Woodstock to Holton, Maine, which is just across the border. And it was in a Sisson's 1973 sale. Again, none of these are known with the 2 cent stamp, and there's only 2 or 3 of them known anyway, from what I am told. The drop letter rate, this February 14th, 1866, covered within Carleton, which is part of St. John, is the earliest. And according to Eastern Auctions, Johann Tanke, it's one of only 3. Registration. Well, registration was 10 cents as the fee in effect from 1860 until August 10th, 1865. And the registration part had to be prepaid with stamps. Or sorry, had to be prepaid. The other could be sent without any stamps. I don't have any examples of any of them. So these are just representative coverage, if you would. Usually they were a 10 cents and a bisect 10. There are some also with a 10 and a 5 cent stamp, but I haven't seen any recently. The 3 5 cents on a registered cover is Compliments of Bill Radcliffe. It's in his collection. The registration fee was cut to 5 cents in August 1865. And here's an example of the new format in a way. The 5 cent stamp paid the postage and another 5 cent for registration. But now you see this marking on the left, a registered letter number, and it's a hand stamp used at St. John, and then the registration letter number would be applied in manuscript. This is one of the classic standard coverage you'll ever see in any country. I mean, just for its looks, never mind its value, although I think it sold for $3,200 a couple of years ago. I was not the last bidder, unfortunately. But anyway, it was mailed March 29th from St. John to Halifax. with 9 5-cent stamps, paying the postage of 40 cents for a letter of 3.5 to 4 ounces, and the 5-cent registration fee. Kind of fun is the fact that on the left, you'll see the stamp is upside down. And I don't know whether that was intentional, a joke, or it just came out that way. But anyway, it also has the registered letter number, in this case 80 in red is the proper color. The date stamp from St. John is on the reverse, of course. But nicely on the front of the cover shows its arrival with a Halifax oval on April the 2nd. There are 2 more registered covers, which are interesting, but not spectacular. The one on the left has 79 cents worth of various New Brunswick stamps, and it pays the 10-cent registration fee in 1864 and postage of 69 cents. Well, it should have been 70 cents, of course, for a letter of 6.5 to 7 ounces. So the post office got gypped. It doesn't happen too often. And on the right is a letter of 1864, also from St. John to Harvey. And this is the highest rate cover of the New Brunswick Cents period, with 85 cents in postage for 8 to 8.5 ounces, and the registration fee of 10 cents. These covers have been around quite a bit, and at least the one on the right was from Graham McLeod's collection again. Uh-oh. What do I do now, guys? I've lost my ability to go forward here. Okay, now we come to Newfoundland. And officially the rate for a letter to Newfoundland is 13 cents. But it's a fiction. Nobody ever paid 13 cents. Nobody ever received 13 cents. It was split between the sender and the recipient. And here, I guess we have to go into the entire British GPO system of conveying letters by water between any parts of the empire. The GPO gave Canada and the Maritimes its postal independence in 1851, but it kept total control over overseas mail. So if you were mailing a letter to Newfoundland, you would pay 5 cents postage to get it to a port. Now, for going from New Brunswick or Nova Scotia to Newfoundland, it would go from Halifax to St. John's. And as I say, the sender paid the postage within BNA. Then at Halifax, the GPO system, the GPO took it over. For international mail, they provided the system, they provided the ships and personnel, and they arranged for letters to be delivered to the sender in wherever it was addressed to. And they would mark on it how much was to be collected from the recipient. So the recipient paid the GPO for carrying the money across the letter across the water and for delivering it in Newfoundland, which was set at 4 pence sterling. Now, 4 pence sterling was the equivalent of 8 cents New Brunswick currency. And hence everybody says, well, the rate was 13 cents per half ounce. Well, as I say, it's sort of a fiction, but that's what it adds up to. These 3 covers show the 4s, on 2 of them anyway, which were struck in blue or black. And it shows 3 different frankings of them. I gotta go down here. Okay, now in late 1863, the whole system changed. Now, to mail letters to Newfoundland or anywhere else within the empire, it was prepaid, the postage rate in full by the sender. So if you were mailing a letter to Newfoundland, it now cost you 14 cents paid up front. And it would go to Halifax as usual. The GPO would take over the letter, get it to Newfoundland, and deliver it, and charge the recipient nothing. But they still were going to make sure that they get paid. So now you have the 4 pence, and it's in red, and that means that they have a claim on the New Brunswick government for that amount. So of the 14 cents that was paid, the GPO would take 9 cents. And so the New Brunswick post office still ended up with 5 cents, the same as they did under the previous system. But now, every quarter or so, they would settle up and pay the GPO for the service. The letter below has it there. It's not very easily seen. The letter on the right, sent in 1864, was double weight, and it, of course, would be charged 8 pence for the GPO service, and the province would keep a dime out of the 28 cents postage. Why 13 to 14 cents? Well, it wasn't really an increase in postage rates. What's happened is the GPO decided that they would raise to the nearest penny sterling the rate expressed in cents. So it cost New Brunswickers an extra penny, which wasn't a postal rate increase as much as it was just an adjustment in amounts. However, you still had to pay the penny. Now all the covers to Newfoundland in this era and through the 1850s too, were sent to the firm of J&W Boyd. And docketing in the cover at left identifies the sender as the firm of Gilmore and Rankin, which was a major factor in the New Brunswick forest industry. And they operated sawmills and operated as timber merchants too. And their big competitor, by the way, were the Kennards, the founders of the Kennard Line family. J&W Boyd was a commission and timber merchant located on Water Street in St. John's. And in this case, the order was for cod oil, and there was a further docketing note that we'll send it as soon as we can hire a schooner. Okay, mail to the United States. The basic rate, as I said, was 10 cents per half ounce, except for California and Oregon. And all I've done is show a couple of examples here. The one on the right, the cancellation on the stamp, is a New Brunswick grid. They ordered 40 of these grids in 1853 or 4, thereabouts, and from the UK, and assigned them to the post offices, St. John being number 1 because it's the largest, and the rest being in alphabetical order up to about 30-ish, and then after 33. And then after that, they periodically added new post offices. And this 39 was for Indiantown, awarded in 1865 or 1864. And there are only 4 covers with the cents issue with this cancellation. So I thought I'd show it. Okay, the Examples here are merely an unusual payment using 5-cent stamps to the US instead of 1 10-cent stamp, and below the 20 marking to emphasize payment with 2 10-cent stamps. The red, of course, indicates that the letter was prepaid. And unusually to the states, which was a 10-cent requirement, this cover only paid 5 cents. Postmaster caught it, wrote on 10 as being double deficiency to be collected in the US, 5 cents for postage and 5 cents fine. Here are examples to the far west. The first one is 1861 from Kingston, New Brunswick to San Francisco with a 10-cent and a 5-cent stamp. It was unclaimed, which most mail to California was, because it took 2 months to get there for starters. And mailed July, unclaimed and advertised on September the 4th, and entered the return mail on November 15th and got back to the New Brunswick Dead Letter Office 2.5 months later in 1862. Below is the only cover to California with 3 5-cent stamps. I saw this one at London 2000, and it was, I thought, dreadfully overpriced at the time. I didn't get it. On the right is a 10 cents cover after the rate was lowered in 1864. And it's the only known cover to Oregon at the 10 cents rate. In 1866, you'll remember that the stamp had to be applied to any letter. And for some odd reason, New Brunswick put in some funny hand stamps, one of which says paid all. And it was struck on this letter to the US. Now, it was in the Argenti collection, and he didn't make any comments on it. He just said, there it was. And my guess is that it was intended as much to remind the Canadian postal handlers that a stamp's been attached and it just happens to be the proper rate. And the odd thing about this cover is there are no markings at all, no dates, no sending post office, no nothing, no receiving marks, just evidently went. A way letter could be discussed either with the Canadian stamps or with the Americans. Now, a writer could hand a letter to a courier who was on his route, so he didn't have to take it to the post office, give it to the courier. And at the time, the sender would pay the full rate to destination in cash to the courier. And the courier would deposit the letter at the first post office stop, and he would hand in the letter with his signature, which is up here at the top, and the cash for which he was personally responsible. And at the post office, the letter would be marked way, usually in manuscript, and the stamp was attached, and the stamp was canceled, and the letter was date stamped and sent on its way. Now, St. John had a circular hammer with the word way letter down here, and it received the proper treatment. But notably at Philadelphia, the addressee couldn't be located, and down at the bottom is a not found marking, and it was advertised on July the 5th, 1866, but we don't know what happened after that. There's no more markings. We come to transatlantic mail, first via the Canadian ports. The cover on the left is to Miss Smith. Miss Smith had a friend in St. John, and she would write to the UK. And this Miss Smith saved all kinds of correspondence. And it's really important for the pence period because possibly certainly over a quarter of all the letters that still exist to the UK in before 1860 were to her. Nothing special about the letter at the bottom, except it's as a American Telegraph Company imprint. And in 1862, there was a change again in the way the UK handled mail. And as of 1862, the GPO said that all transatlantic mail had to be fully paid with stamps. And there was a fine of 6 pence sterling plus any deficiency in the shortfall. Now, in New Brunswick, in the early stages, just to make sure that everybody knew that the letter had been fully prepaid, they applied in red this hand stamp, New Brunswick paid. There are a few double weight letters to the UK. This one in 1865 from Fredericton to Johnstown Island. And again from Argenti's book, from his collection, the only registered cover that's known, whereby the registration rate was 12.5 cents. It was lowered, I thought it was before 1867, but it obviously not, since this is when it was dated according to Argenti. And it went from St. John to the UK. There wasn't much reason for a person in New Brunswick to send a letter via New York to the UK, and not many of them did. There's 3 or 4 or 5 known. This is the only one I've ever seen, either in person or in the catalogs, and it seems to come up every 5 or 8 years. On the right is the only known double weight cover to the UK, paid with a pair, well, not a pair, but 2 17-cent stamps. And it was from the Coe sale offered by Spink in 1999, I think it was. The transatlantic mail rate to France via the UK was 17 cents. And this letter was mailed September 24th from St. John, France. And it was routed via the UK, you can tell by the red hand stamp. And at Calais, it was properly struck, paid to destination, the PD in the red oval. There's just no explanation for the addition of a 10-cent stamp. Maybe somebody thought it was a double weight. Maybe somebody just didn't know the rate to France. And somewhere over here, it said more to pay. That struck out. And but somebody put the 10-cent stamp on it, and that was the way it went. Letters to Bermuda. The postage rate was 13 cents, just as it was to Newfoundland, with the same treatment until late 1863. And then for the same reasons, it was increased to 14 cents. And like letters to Newfoundland, the charge was 4 pence sterling. Here, again, as in Newfoundland in the 14 cents era, it was charged against the payment of 14 cents against the New Brunswick post office, so that they only got 5 cents for the cover. The rate to Jamaica was 21 cents until 1863, 22 cents thereafter. And in this case, the handling charge would be 8 pence sterling, or 17 cents Canadian or New Brunswick. So of the 22 cents postage, New Brunswick only got 5 cents. Now, this is it was a full cover, and in the catalog from the Argenti by Harmer Rook, I think it showed some yellow under here, so you knew it was a full cover, but then of course the rest was hidden. So we don't know any data other than it arrived in Kingston on April the 20th in 1864. We're down to the last set of covers, you'd be pretty pleased to know, and they were all to the Barbados. Now, the cover on the left and the cover at the top right were both owned by Liechtenstein. The charge, because it was so far away, was again 8 pence, 8 pence sterling, or 17 cents New Brunswick currency, and it was claimed against the 22 cents in postage, here paid with 2 tens and a 2-cent stamp. The letter was mailed on November the 25th. It passed through St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands on the way, and its arrival marking is December 21, 1865. The two on the right were offered as one lot by Spink. And they did say that the first one, well, no, the reason I know the first was 1866 is because Argenti said so, and he had seen it, and it was mentioned in his book. The one below is a double weight. So you see that the charge is 1 shilling 4 pence. And who got them? And they've never come up again. They were in the co-sale, and they were just passed off with no comment in the catalog other than this is they. Well, I'm at the end. With the introduction of the large queens, the stamps in New Brunswick were retired, but they could still be used for a reasonable time, which seemed to be at the discretion of the postmaster. But the rates for domestic domestic Canadian letters was reduced from 5 cents to 3. So that if you used a 5-cent stamp for a domestic letter, which was done here on September 1868, you overpaid by 2 cents the proper rate. And this very last cover, which again came from Graham McLeod's collection, the sender used 3 1-cent New Brunswick stamps, which is the proper Canadian postage rate. So it's quite a cover, and mailed on March 24th, 1870 from Fredericton to St. John. And that's all I have to say.